I love that song. I hope it resonates with you this morning. I'm going to continue our series through the book of Esther in a moment, but first, as a Dodgers fan, that's all. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. No, it will be... It's all right. I'm used to it. It's fine. I've been in enemy territory most of my adult life. It's all good. But it will be fun to see how this plays out in the future. That's all the sports analogy you'll get today. So that's what you get. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Peter Gothold. I'm one of the pastors here at Kenkov, and we have been going through the book of Esther recently, and I'm going to continue that with Esther chapter 4 today. Before we get there, just want to say that everybody loves a hero. A reluctant hero, even more so. What greater story is there than the person who's too afraid to stand up, ending up saving the day in the end? Think of all the great adventure stories, your favorites. You don't have to look far to see a reluctant hero. Ender's Game, anybody read Ender's Game? So good. Ender, very reluctant hero, wonderful. The Matrix has Neo, Harry Potter has any number of people. My favorite is Neville Longbottom. Lord of the Rings has Frodo, but probably the closest to my heart is Han Solo. If you know me, you know I'm a Star Wars fan. This guy is highly capable, but totally unwilling to risk himself for the good of the galaxy. Yet, when it counts, he comes through under the guise of getting a reward. These characters are quite approachable in their doubts and fears, and they make us feel like we might be able to respond in the same way should the need arise. Everyone loves a hero. I could do that. I could stand up and be a hero. Could you? I know I question my own heart and strength to do that. I want to, yes, but could I? I don't know. How did these characters get to the place where they were willing to give everything, willing to die for a cause that maybe wasn't theirs to begin with? That's a good question. Let's look at one person's reluctant hero journey, Queen Esther. She is an icon. She is one who single-handedly changes history for her people and the redemptive history of the world. Let's go ahead and read Esther chapter 4. And if you remember, you are welcome to cheer for the names Esther and Mordecai. Woo! Thank you. And boo for the names Haman and Xerxes. Boo! Good, we're warmed up. Let's read chapter 4 together. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province in which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came in and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised big boo, yes. Had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but only one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. The word of God for the people of God. So as we've been learning about this story, Esther and Mordecai are Jews who have access to the king Xerxes because Esther had won a royal beauty contest and became queen when Xerxes got mad at the previous queen for not parading herself in front of her drunk husband's business buddies. And right before this chapter, we hear that Haman wants to kill all the Jews because Mordecai would not bow down before him. It's a mild overreaction. But we get to this moment in the story where Esther, the queen, learns what her husband's pal Haman has in store. Mordecai and all the Jews in town have heard that Haman convinced the king to murder them all, but somehow Esther had not yet become aware of this. Perhaps Esther's sheltered position in the palace, it kind of makes you wonder. Yet it is not until she sees her uncle in the morning that she knows anything is wrong. She then tries to get him to cheer up. "Uncle, please, you're making a scene." Anybody have crazy uncles? Anybody who is the crazy uncle? Maybe it's you. So anyway, she sends clothes to him with a message to get him to come back to a respectable state. He responds with the news that Esther had been sheltered from. All our people are now targets of state-sanctioned violence. Xerxes' power has been co-opted by Haman and was going to be used to enact genocide because of one Jew's disrespect. This may sound extreme, and yes, of course it is, but it is unfortunately not that uncommon if you look at world history. For Xerxes, even being in his presence without an invitation was a crime punishable by death. Xerxes had what we might call a god complex. And if you're wondering why Xerxes' name might sound so familiar, it might be because of the movie 300. So we have a picture. This is from the movie. This isn't actually a historic photo of Xerxes or anything. But I was going to use the reference. I am using a reference of this movie, but then I looked it up and it was 2004 and I felt so old. Who's seen 300? Anybody? Okay, there's like 6 of us. Okay, anyways, that's Xerxes' god complex. That's the point. He fancied himself a god on earth. And in his younger days, he had massive military success across the Middle East and Mediterranean. He was used to getting what he wanted and for people to say what he wanted to hear. It's funny how those in power can choose what and who to listen to. Xerxes, in this story of Esther, he's a fascinating character. He seems to go with whomever he's talking to. When Haman is speaking, Xerxes goes along. When Esther is speaking, Xerxes goes along, as we'll see next week. In this story, he seems to be an easily swayed leader who just wants to impress people. That's my read on him anyway. The problem is he has a screening problem. Those who are around him are sycophantic, power-hungry folk who care more about their image than the lives of thousands of people. And at the request of Haman, Xerxes agrees to exterminate all the Jews. This is incredible injustice. I'm not a 5th century BC Middle Eastern political expert, but this seems wrong to me. The wanton killing of innocent people as an act of revenge and show of power should be shocking to you. This is not how life is supposed to be for God's people or for anyone that bears the image of God, which is everyone. I'm not God. obviously. But I imagine God's plan for humanity doesn't involve destroying one another. Why is this idea so prevalent in history? Even today, we find ourselves at odds with other religions, other cultures, ideologies, and imagine the world is better off without fill in the blank. Democrats, Republicans, that country, this king, government, whatever. And we as a culture have bought into the lie that started back with Cain and Abel, that there's no way to coexist on earth among people with whom we disagree. Kill or be killed, survival of the fittest. It seems as though we as a people have not progressed as much as we would like to think. Everywhere you turn, there's massive injustice happening in our time, globally, nationally, regionally, locally, even in our immediate circles. Just read the news. Just like Esther, we are in danger if we stay in our safe bubbles and don't pay attention. Everywhere on earth, which includes here now, we are on earth now. There are stories of injustice happening on every scale, and we are not immune or above it. Now, I could go item by item and depress us all with the horrible things happening in our country and world today, but that's not the point. You probably know to some degree what's happening, what people are living through in this moment here in this country as much as worldwide. We, as postmodern Western people, are in not any way innocent, better, or have it figured out. There is still massive injustice occurring now in our time, in our country, and we buy into it, we celebrate it, or choose to ignore it. And this is not new. Listen to this quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor and theologian who lived through World War II and who happened to be against the extermination of the Jews and who was executed for his involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler just 2 months before the end of the war. From his book Ethics, speaking of injustice, he says this: "But the good man too, no less than the wicked, succumbs to the same temptation to be a despiser of mankind if he sees through all of this and withdraws in disgust, leaving his fellow men to their own devices, and if he prefers to mind his own business rather than to debase himself in public life. Of course, his contempt for mankind is more respectable and upright, but it is also more barren and ineffectual. In the face of God's becoming man, the good man's contemptuous attitude cannot be maintained any more than can the tyrant's. The despiser of men despises what God has loved. Indeed, he despises even the figure of God who has become man." See, that's the thing, right? We're not talking about abstract things or ideas. We're talking about God's image in the person right in front of us. Do we want it said about us that we despise the image of God? I imagine that's not something you want on your resume, yet it's how we operate sometimes. When our political or ideological differences define our relationships to those around us, it becomes easy to dehumanize and despise those whom we have never even met. And it's easy to commit acts of injustice when the recipient is less than human, according to us. This seems to be standard operating procedure for our cultural moment. If we can discredit, devalue, and dehumanize those whom we don't like, or those who scare us, or those who oppose us on some level, then we don't have to treat them as images of God. This leads to terrible things, as Bonhoeffer can tell you. And unfortunately, we haven't learned much in the past 90 years. The same dangerous dehumanization of enemies is happening now in our world, in our time, which opens the door to massive injustice, in which the perpetrators feel justified, since it is just those people who don't belong, who don't look, act, believe what I do. God have mercy. We need people like Mordecai to pull us out of our bubbles and call us to action. And we need the faith and strength of character to move towards injustice and challenge it like Esther does. Esther's response to Mordecai's challenge is really what the big picture of this book is about. She starts unsure, afraid, and maybe trying to get out of it, or at least not wanting to get into it. If I go uninvited, I might die. That's a real concern. understandably. But Mordecai reminds her that she'll die anyways once her identity is revealed. Some commentators hint that this could be a veiled threat by Mordecai. As she's lived for years in the palace and it was still unknown that she was a Jew, how would they find out now? In any case, Mordecai in his famous speech convinces Esther that she has everything she needs to challenge the injustice in front of her. She has access to the king. She is loved by the king. At least she was at some point. She is perfectly positioned to influence the king, and it would be disaster for her and her people if she doesn't use that influence now. Listen again to Mordecai's challenge for her. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Mordecai sees the opportunity and has the awareness to use what is available to him to try to stop the injustice that is cooking in the kingdom. Just as a parenthetical side note, the word used for relief here in this verse is the Hebrew word ruach. Any Bible Project people out there? If that is a familiar organization to you, they use the word ruach a lot, and it's the word that is used in the Old Testament for breath, wind, and spirit, often related to God. And this is what's used in the creation narrative where God's ruach hovered over the water. Here in Esther, it's translated as relief, which makes sense as a kind of space to breathe. But it connects this story to God's story of redemption in a powerful way. Word studies are crazy. Man, if you have a lot of time and are looking for ways to fill it, learn Hebrew. And then you can teach me. It'll be great. So side note over. Then when we hear what is probably the most recognizable part of the book of Esther, who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai is reminding Esther that maybe it wasn't a coincidence that she catapulted into the lap of luxury. Maybe there was a greater design. A greater plan. Maybe her access and favor is there for a reason. Maybe her position was provided so that she could be in a position to challenge Haman's injustice and the king's passive support. In this case, Esther has everything she needs to challenge injustice. She has the resources, she has the relationships, and she has a reason to challenge it. Her resources are what this story is all about. She rose to her position because of the king's self-indulgent tendencies. Vashti, nah. Esther, yeah. Whatever it was, she was now in proximity to power with the favor of the king on her side. She was on top with the world at her disposal. What would she do with this position? So she has the resources, she has the relationship, the favor of the king. She was his favorite. Even though she was not called for the past month, there was still the fact that she won the contest that he organized. She was his favorite. And as we learned from Vashti, his favor or lack thereof means a lot. She also had a relationship with Mordecai and the Jews, being a Jew herself. She stood as a kind of bridge in this case due to the relationships that she had. And, of course, she has reason to challenge the king's planned injustice. She and all her people with her were in very real danger. Haman's rage was aimed at her and her fellow Jews, sealed by the law that was the king's word. Esther was convinced that maybe she could make a difference, and it would be better for her to try and fail than for her to do nothing. And so Esther, our reluctant hero, begins a plan that will eventually, spoiler alert, lead to the salvation of her people. That plan we will look at in the coming weeks, but what I want to point out here is that Esther has everything she needs to challenge injustice right where she is. She has resources, relationships, and a reason. I promise you that here in this room, every one of us has these three things as well. It may not feel like it, but you have resources, relationships, and I hope you are learning that you have a reason to challenge injustice where you see it. You don't have to be a queen to make a difference. What are the things that you do have that you can leverage for the benefit of those ensnared in bondage right under your nose? For the immigrant, the widow, the poor, those on the margins of society are fighting for their lives every day, and we sit in the king's harem, fat and happily unaware that the world around us is crying for freedom. Or, perhaps worse, we hear it and don't care. Dominic Gilliard, the director of Racial Righteousness and Reconciliation for our denomination, says it this way in his book, Subversive Witness, in which he explores this exact same theme from the book of Esther. He says it this way: choosing to speak out against evil will always cost us something, and staying silent as oppression abounds will fatally seal the fate of our neighbors. While many have been taught to understand silence as neutrality or simply staying above the fray, silence amid oppression legitimates the status quo and only leads to more suffering, injustice, and death. In fact, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." Whoa. My relative insulation from the pain and of those struggling in the world can lead to what? Am I really willing to cooperate with evil? Are you? So how do we avoid that? There is so much in the world that we can't possibly fix it all. So we can look to Esther to see what we can do. Her position was certainly different than most of ours, but the actions she took are scalable for us everyday folk. First, we use our resources. What do you have available to you? Time? Money? Education? Find ways to use those. Where you see injustice around you, what are you able to do? It will be different in every situation for every person, but you have resources at your disposal. Give to organizations working to end injustice. If you need ideas, come ask me. I'd be glad to share. You could volunteer with organizations seeking to care for and restore those who have been victims of systemic injustice: orphans, widows, poor, immigrants. There are all sorts of ways you can use your resources to make a positive motion in the balance of justice in the world. Quick side note, when I say justice, what I'm referring to is a biblical sense of the word justice, a state of the world as it should be according to God's design. It's not a retributive type of justice like Clint Eastwood revenge justice. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, as they say. Biblical justice is more than getting even. It's an active demonstration of God's heart through fairness, equity, and righteousness, rooted in the inherent dignity of all people created in God's image. It requires proactively seeking to right wrongs, especially for the vulnerable and oppressed. In what ways are you equipped to do that right now? What resources do you have at your disposal? I encourage you to really think about that and come up with a plan to use those resources. God knows our world needs all the help it can get. As an example of someone using the resources I have, I remember a time in high school where there's this dude on the water polo team with me. Yes, believe it or not, I once played water polo. Can't you tell? But he embodied this in a way that totally blew me away and also really humbled me as a follower of Jesus. He was driving along the streets of Whittier, my hometown, minding his own business when he came across a couple on the sidewalk. The man was clearly agitated and the woman was clearly afraid. Instead of driving past, checking in the rearview mirror, which is probably what I would have done, he pulled over, and from the window of his raised 1980s Ford pickup, he said, "Is there a problem?" Like it was some kind of movie. The man immediately straightened up and said no, and the woman was able to walk away from him without further incident. I remember him telling me this story in the locker room and thinking, dude, this guy is a better person than I am, and I'm the one who claims to follow Jesus, not him. He used what he had, which for him at that moment was a big truck and the confidence to step into a hard situation to help someone who needed it. May we all find ways to use the resources we have to challenge injustice when we see it. So first was resources. Second, we use our relationships. Do you know that we can who do we know that we can either join or challenge in the pursuit of justice in our spheres? This one is tricky because it requires tact and transparency. The news is full of stories of people who are willing to challenge anyone, but by doing that, destroy the relationships they may have had. Esther, in her challenge to Xerxes, as we will see later in the story, does not attack her husband, the king, but rather shows clearly the injustice happening, and the king is moved to action. Sorry, I'm giving away next week's story. The point is that if we burn all our bridges because we think they are right, or we think we are right and they are dumb, we have no way to move the conversation forward at all. Be careful and wise in how we speak to our friends and family, especially when they disagree with you. There is a way to disagree and continue to love, despite what modern political figures might say. In our desire to see an end to injustice around us, who are those with whom you have influence? It might be a family member, a neighbor, a local figure, or who knows, you might even have access to global entities. You know who you have access to. In what ways can you use that relationship to move towards justice together? So we have resources, we have relationships. Last, we actually have to have a reason to do it. It's easy to turn a blind eye because it doesn't affect me. Adam Gustine, who is the leader of Cove Enterprises, a social enterprise initiative of Love, Mercy, Do Justice for the Covenant Church, writes in his book that's titled Just Church. The answer, though, is not extraction from political engagement. The reality is that our most vulnerable friends and neighbors experience a structured kind of injustice that will, in the end, require engagement with the political powers in order to seek authentic justice. To reject these issues, calling them outside the purview of the church, is an abdication of the responsibility of co-heirs of Christ. We all are here in this place at this time with resources and relationships at our disposal to make a difference for our brothers and sisters who are experiencing injustice in our own backyard. Do we need more of a reason to do something? Maybe it was for such a time as this, 2025, that you came into money, power, influence, whatever. Whether it feels like it or not, each of us has resources, relationships, and a reason to move towards justice wherever there is an opportunity. The world, our neighbors, friends, and families are waiting for the church to be the church, reflecting the light in the darkness. Jesus, who began his earthly ministry with this statement from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to" what? Proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's what Jesus said he was all about. Jesus' work in this world was not just to prepare a place in heaven for our future, although that is certainly a part of it. His work was to restore people and communities and challenge a system of injustice in his day so that heaven can be experienced here on earth now. And that is something we can do here and now. It's not easy or simple. It takes work, but it is possible, and that gives me hope. I want to read you a quote from Lisa Soul Cahill's work, Blessed Are the Peacemakers, which I find to be so refreshing in our current political climate of anger and hate. She is speaking about the practice of building peace in our communities, which is a natural partner of biblical justice. She says this: peace building is thus a practical strategy of hope. Peace building demonstrates the possibility of and way to hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. Peace building is sustained by the actions of courageous individuals who resist the oppressive and violent activities and expectations in which everyone around them seems trapped. Peace building consists most specifically in risky yet hopeful practices of solidarity and change. These practices engage not only the oppressed and the innocent, but also the oppressors and sinners who can come to imagine and embody reality differently. Isn't that a picture? A glorious picture of what could be, of all of us embodying reality different through God's eyes, God's desires, God's peace. My hope for us as a church is that we would have open eyes and hearts to see, to really see those around us who are in need of ruach, the breath of relief, and we would use what we have to fight injustice and pursue peace. Not cheap peace that avoids conflict, but true peace that leads to healing for us and our community. That's where y'all come in. I'm just one guy. But together with God's people pursuing justice and peace where they are, the world can never be the same. Amen.